What happens when the woman a king brands as property turns out to be the one his wolf was born to protect? Before the entire court, Alpha King Vaelis marked Elira as a slave, stripping her of name, rank, and freedom. To everyone watching, she was nothing but a broken healer too weak to matter. But the moment her blood touched the snow, something inside the king snapped. His wolf did not see a slave. It saw danger, betrayal, and something far more powerful than control. And when the slave mark began to crack, the truth threatened to destroy the kingdom itself. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Now let's begin the story. The Blackstone Hall always smelled like heat, pretending to be mercy. Torchfire climbed the columns in wavering ribbons, and the light slid over the polished floor like oil-thin, glossy, almost alive. Every bootstep from the royal guard made the reflection tremble. Above the sound of the flames, another sound dragged through the vast space, slow and deliberate, as if someone had decided to turn humiliation into music. Chains. Not the light clink of jewelry or ceremonial metal, but the heavy, steady scrape of silver links pulled across stone, measured unavoidable like a sentence being read out loud. The Alphas stood in a broad ring around the central dais, leaving the middle of the hall empty on purpose. No one spoke above a murmur. They didn't have to. Their dominance pressed outward in layered waves, pheromones and instinct, rank and entitlement, thick enough that the air felt weighted, as if breath itself had to ask permission. A nobleman near the front leaned toward his companion, voice low enough to be polite, not low enough to be kind. What did the northern pack bring this time? The companion sniffed a small gesture that somehow managed to be an insult. I heard it's a healer, he said. Then after a beat, he added the part that made the rumor delicious. The useless kind. There was no true curiosity in the hall, not wonder, not interest. Only anticipation, the quiet animal craving to watch something be reduced. If you've ever walked into a room where everyone has already agreed what you are, you know that particular chill. It isn't fear. Fear at least admits you might survive. This is the certainty of being measured and discarded before you're even spoken to. The chains scraped closer. Two guards emerged from the shadowed archway to the left, hauling a woman between them as if she weighed nothing but inconvenience. Her wrists were bound with silver links that bit into her skin with each jerk forward, and she stumbled once, just once, when the chain yanked too hard. Her knees dipped, her balance faltered. Then she caught herself. Not gracefully, not with pride, but with a stubborn refusal that looked almost like indifference. She straightened again, shoulders square, despite the shredded dress clinging to her frame. The fabric was thin, stained with dirt, and old dark patches that had dried too long to be fresh. One shoulder was exposed where the seam had been torn away, revealing shallow abrasions that hadn't had time to fully close. The hall reacted the way predators react to weakness, with interest that pretends to be boredom. A voice from the crowd cut through the hush, amused and cruel. That's the healer you were bragging about. She won't survive the night. The pack escort, one of the northern guards wearing wolf fur at his collar, answered without emotion, as if he were describing a damaged tool. She has old healer blood, he said, but she's weak, can't fight, not worth keeping. Another voice, sharper, eager for details. Then why bring her here? A pause, then the answer, spoken with the calm of someone who believed the world owed him nothing but compliance, to offer her. At least she has value, if someone knows how to use it. The woman didn't speak. Her head remained lifted. Not defiant in the theatrical way that begs to be noticed, no grand glare, no shaking chin, just unbowed. Like a blade that refuses to bend even when it's already cracked. I remember noticing her eyes first, not because they were bright, not because they held magic glittering on the surface. They didn't. They were the color of storm water, gray, deep drained of softness. Eyes that had learned long ago that pleading only teaches people you can be made to beg. If you want to write strength, well, don't make it loud. Make it inevitable. Make it the quiet choice a person keeps making when no one is rewarding them for it. The guards pulled her to the center of the hall and stopped. The chain slackened slightly, and the sound of it settling onto stone was almost tender compared to everything else. The woman stood there in the open, facing the dais, facing the ring of alphas, facing an entire world built to devour her. No one announced the arrival of the king. There were no trumpets, no ceremonial cries. Those were for rulers who needed reminders, for men who required pageantry to make their power real. This man didn't. The first warning was silence, not the respectful hush of a court, but the kind of silence that spreads because instinct demands it. Conversations died mid-breath. A few alphas who had been standing with their weight forward, smug, subtly shifted back as if the air had suddenly turned sharp. An invisible pressure descended. It was not a command spoken aloud. It was presence, old dominance, honed absolute. Even the strongest wolves in the hall lowered their eyes on reflex as if their bodies had decided survival mattered more than pride. From the shadows above the dais, Vaelis Draven stepped into view. He didn't hurry, he didn't look around to take in the room. He simply existed within it, and the hall reorganized itself around him the way fire pulls oxygen. Tall, broad-shouldered, built like a weapon shaped into human form. His hair was dark, falling back from his face in a way that looked careless until you realized nothing about him was careless. His jaw was sharp enough to make softness feel like a joke, and his eyes were the kind of gold you don't find in jewelry. Too vivid, too alive, the color of a predator watching you decide whether you're worth the effort. Someone near the back whispered half awe and half fear. Alpha King. Vaelis's gaze swept the hall once a slow, unhurried motion. It skimmed over nobles, over guards, over rival alphas standing rigid with forced composure. Then it stopped. On her. On Elira. There was no surprise on his face, no curiosity, not even the faint intrigue people pretend to feel when they are about to own something. Only selection. As if he had come into the hall knowing exactly what he would take. He stepped down a single stair from the dais, and the change in the room was immediate. The dominance thickened. A few breaths hitched. Even the torch flames seemed to pull tighter against their brackets, suddenly conscious of being watched. Vaelis spoke at last. His voice was low and calm, the kind of sound that didn't need volume because it carried authority as naturally as breath. Bring her here. A ripple went through the nobles. Confusion, surprise. Not because he chose a captive. Kings did that all the time, but because he chose this one. A nobleman who had clearly forgotten his place took a half step forward, trying to shape the moment into politics. My king, she's only a weak healer. Vaelis didn't even turn his head toward him. He cut through the protest like a blade through silk. I didn't ask for your opinion. The nobleman froze. The humiliation of being dismissed without a glance was its own punishment. The guards yanked Elira forward toward the steps leading up to the dais. The chain tightened again, forcing her to move faster than her battered body wanted to. She stumbled once more, not from weakness this time, but from the sharp jerk of the silver binding cutting into her wrists. She caught herself again. When she came to a stop near the base of the steps, she stood straight. Her breathing was shallow but controlled. Her shoulders trembled only slightly, the kind of tremor you get when pain has been held back too long. Vaelis looked down at her. For the first time, their eyes met fully. Elira didn't look away. She didn't lower her gaze in submission. She didn't raise her chin in foolish challenge. She simply met him. I have always loved that kind of courage, the kind that doesn't ask if it's safe first, the kind that exists because a person has already lost everything that could be taken. One of the guards pushed hard at Elira's shoulder, trying to force her down. Her knee hit the stone. She went down to one knee, but not fully. Her muscles locked, resisting, refusing the final surrender of posture. Vaelis stepped down one more stair. It was only one step, but the pressure in the room spiked so sharply that a few wolves near the edge of the ring clenched their jaws, fighting the reflex to bow. Vaelis's voice dropped softer, somehow more dangerous. Kneel. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It slid into the air like iron sinking into water. Elira's body trembled, her throat tightened, not because she wanted to obey, but because dominance is a language wolves understand whether they agree with it or not. Her lungs fought her. Her spine wanted to fold under the weight of his command. Still, she kept her head lifted. A guard snarled at her from behind. On your knees you stand before the king. The chain jerked. Her balance finally gave. With a sharp, ugly scrape, Elira's second knee hit the floor. The sound echoed in the hall, dry, hard final. Vaelis looked out over the court as if he were addressing a room of objects rather than people. From this moment on, he said, voice clear enough to carry to every corner, she is no longer a person. A pulse of satisfied murmurs moved through the nobles like wind through tall grass. Vaelis continued, the final word landing like a seal. She is property. Not everyone smiled. Some watched with the careful interest of those who knew they might one day be the one on the floor. But most looked pleased to have a scapegoat. A spectacle, something to remind themselves they were safe because someone else was not. Vaelis lifted his hand. The gesture was casual, almost bored. Elira felt the movement the way a prey animal feels a shadow pass over it. She inhaled slow as if she could make her body smaller from the inside. His hand reached her throat. In the instant his skin made contact with hers, something shifted. It wasn't visible to anyone else. No flare of light, no dramatic shockwave. Just a pause, half a heartbeat of stillness in the perfect rhythm of a king. Vaelis's pupils tightened. A faint tension pulled at the corner of his jaw. Inside him, inside the beast that lived beneath his control, his wolf halted. A low, rough sound rolled through Vaelis's mind. Not anger, but interruption. Recognition trying to claw its way through iron discipline. Vaelis stopped for the smallest fraction of time. His beta-ridden core, who stood near the throne like a shadow made loyal, narrowed his eyes. My king, he murmured, voice careful. Vaelis's fingers tightened against Elira's skin. The pause vanished. Nothing he said, and the word was colder than the stone beneath Elira's knees. Then the magic came. It surged from Vaelis's palm into the hollow of Elira's throat, and the sensation was immediate and violent. A dark heat spread beneath her skin like reverse fire burning inward instead of outward, threading into muscle and bone. Elira's teeth clenched so hard, her jaw ached. She refused to cry out, refused to give them the satisfaction. The mark formed as a black pattern blossoming across her throat, curling like ink in water, shaping into an ancient symbol meant to bind. It wasn't merely a brand, it was a lock. Elira felt it reach down her spine as if something had wrapped chains around her nerves. The pain wasn't sharp so much as suffocating, like being held underwater while your body insists on inhaling. Her breath hitched. The smell of heated metal and spellcraft mixed with the scent of torch smoke. Someone in the crowd laughed, quietly pleased. Let's see how long the healer lasts, a guard muttered with a grin. Elira's eyes stayed open. Water gathered at the corners, not from fear, but from the body's betrayal when it cannot contain pain. She didn't blink. If you want to make a moment feel like a knife to the reader, don't oversell it. Let the silence do the cutting. Let the refusal to break be the loudest sound in the room. Vaelis finished the mark. The magic settled into her skin with a final heavy press, as if a door had closed and the key had been thrown away. As his hand lifted from her throat, a pulse of energy snapped between them. It wasn't bright, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real, a ripple so subtle that no one in the hall noticed it at all. No one except Vaelis. His wolf snarled again, but not in fury, in recognition. A single thought sliced through Vaelis's mind with the clean certainty of instinct. Wrong. Not wrong as in failure. Wrong as in this mark wasn't meant for her. Or perhaps worse, she wasn't meant to be marked like this. Vaelis's expression didn't change, not outwardly. He crushed the thought before it could become doubt. Ryden leaned in, slightly voice low enough to be private. Are you certain Vaelis cut him off without looking at him? The marking is complete. The words were final, a door closed, a decision made. The guards loosened Elira's chains slightly enough to let her breathe, not enough to make her feel free. The brand on her throat pulsed once hot and heavy. Elira raised her head. Her face was pale, her lips were cracked, but her eyes were intact. She looked at Vaelis and spoke, her voice rough from pain but startlingly steady. You call that control. A few nobles laughed aloud. The sound was delighted, incredulous. A slave dares to speak. Vaelis didn't look angry. That would have implied she mattered enough to provoke emotion. He looked cold. That is order, he said. Elira's mouth tightened. She exhaled slowly, as if she were tasting the word and finding it rotten. No, she said, quiet but clear. That is fear. The hall froze. Even the torch flames seemed to hold still for a breath. A guard stepped forward with the eager cruelty of someone who enjoyed being allowed to hurt. He lifted his hand as if to strike her. Vaelis raised his fingers slightly, not even a full gesture. The guard stopped instantly, his arm hanging midair. Enough, Vaelis said. The guard withdrew, swallowing hard. The message was clear. Elira was property now, and only the king decided what happened to what he owned. Elira was yanked to her feet. Her knees nearly buckled, but the chains held her upright like puppeteer strings. She was dragged toward the side door leading down into the lower levels, the place the court pretended didn't exist. No one watched her go for long. The spectacle was already ending. The court's appetite, temporarily fed, was turning toward the next diversion. But Vaelis remained where he was standing on the steps with the torches behind him, his face unreadable. In his skull, his wolf was not calm. It paced restless, as if it had caught a scent it couldn't forget. Ryden's voice came carefully, like a hand approaching a wild animal. It's only a slave, my king. Vaelis didn't answer at first. His gaze stayed fixed on the door Elira had disappeared through, as if the stone itself might explain something. Then after a long beat, he said, I know. But the words lacked the certainty they should have carried, and that more than any magic, more than any cruelty, was the first crack. After being branded as a slave, is this truly the end for her, or just the beginning of something far more dangerous? And why did something inside the king lose control the moment the mark was complete? Tell me what you think, and don't forget to subscribe before we dive into the most intense part of the story. The lower levels of the citadel were built to be forgotten. The ceilings were low, the corridors narrow, the air damp with the smell of old stone and old suffering. Lanterns burned with a weak yellow light that never fully chased away the shadows. The walls sweated cold. Somewhere deeper water dripped steadily, patient as time. This was where the court sent everything it didn't want to look at. Elira was thrown into a room that served as both infirmary and holding pen. The floor was scrubbed but stained. Rows of cots lined one wall. The other was stacked with crates of bandages and cheap herbs that smelled more like hope than medicine. Elira's wrists were freed from the silver chain at last, but the relief was short-lived. The mark on her throat remained heavy as a collar. A guard shoved a wounded soldier toward her. The man fell at Elira's feet with a groan, clutching his side. "Work," the guard said flatly. "If he dies, you die instead." Elira stared at the soldier for half a second. Then she knelt, not because she had been ordered, not because she had forgotten what pride was, because the man was bleeding and leaving him like that would be too easy. Her hands moved, quickly practiced. She pressed cloth to the wound, checked the damage beneath. Her eyes narrowed, calculating. There was no panic in her, no dramatic tremble, only focus. A young servant, another captive judging by the bruises and the hollow eyes, hovered nearby, whispering as if afraid of the sound of hope. "Can you actually heal him?" Elira didn't look up. "If he wants to live," she said. The soldier's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "I don't want to die," he rasped. Elira's mouth tightened, and for the first time there was something like emotion in her voice. "Then don't." She reached inward, searching for her magic. It was there, faint, like a candle flame trapped behind glass. She pushed at it. The slave mark pulsed. Pain shot down her spine with brutal precision. Elira's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers spasmed. She tried again. The pain sharpened, squeezing her ribs like invisible hands. The guard laughed, enjoying her frustration. "That's right," he said. "You don't get to decide how much you can do." Elira swallowed the pain. She forced her breathing steady, the way you do when you have learned that losing control makes you easier to break. She adjusted. Instead of drawing on deep magic, she used the smallest thread possible, just enough to seal the wound slightly to slow the bleeding to buy time. The mark allowed it grudgingly, like a leash, giving just enough slack to keep the dog alive. The soldier's breathing steadied. Color returned faintly to his face. The servant's eyes widened. "You did it." Elira's gaze flicked briefly to the mark on her throat. "Not all of it," she murmured. Days passed like that. Elira was used and tested, made to heal those the court cared about, and ignore those it didn't. Guards barked orders. Nobles occasionally descended into the lower levels with disgusted expressions, as if the air itself offended them. Elira spoke only when necessary. She learned quickly what the mark did. It punished disobedience. It tightened when she resisted. It burned when she tried to make choices that weren't hers to make. It didn't just control her body, it controlled the range of her magic, strangling it down to a manageable trickle. They had not branded her simply to humiliate her. They had branded her to limit her. Above, politics moved like a slow predator. In the bright halls of the upper citadel, where tapestries masked stone and sunlight filtered through high windows, the High Council gathered around the king with the comfortable arrogance of people who believed they were necessary. Malor sat at the head of the council table, fingers steepled. "The Eastern Territories grow restless," he said. "They want assurance, stability." Vaelis stood by the window, gaze angled outward, as if the city below were more interesting than the men speaking at him. "Say what you mean." Malor smiled thinly. "A queen," he said. "A mate chosen to unite alliances. The Eastern Pacts have offered Sereth Vale." As if summoned by her own name, Sereth stepped forward from the line of nobles waiting near the doors. She was beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful. Sharp, dangerous, designed to be admired from a safe distance. Her dress was deep crimson, tailored to highlight power more than softness. Her hair fell in sleek waves, and her eyes held the steady confidence of someone who had never been told no. She bowed not deeply, just enough to be appropriate. "If you require a mate worthy of your throne," she said smoothly, "I am prepared." A noble chimed in, quickly eager. The alliance would strengthen the border. "The Vale Pack's forces are formidable." Vaelis turned slightly, finally looking at Sereth. His expression was unreadable. "Prepared," he echoed, as if testing the word. Sereth lifted her chin. "I understand the demands of power." Vaelis said nothing for a moment. Then he gave a small nod. Not agreement, not acceptance, only acknowledgement. "Very well," he said. "We will proceed with the formalities." Relief moved through the council like a shared exhale. This was what they wanted, a king who could be anchored by politics. They didn't notice the way Vaelis's jaw tightened as soon as he turned away. They didn't hear the low, restless growl that stirred beneath his calm. The first time Sereth touched him, it happened in front of everyone. It was meant to be a signal, an elegant gesture, a polite claim. Sereth stepped closer and let her fingers brush Vaelis's hand, a soft, deliberate contact. The room held its breath, watching for the royal response. Vaelis's fingers closed around her wrist. Hard. Sereth's expression flickered just for a second. "My king?" she said lightly, trying to turn discomfort into flirtation. "You're hurting me." The air around Vaelis changed. His eyes darkened. His pupils widened until the gold nearly disappeared. The dominance rolling off him sharpened, turning from weight to threat. Ryden, standing behind him, moved half a step forward. "Sire," he murmured. Vaelis released Sereth abruptly, as if her skin had burned him. Sereth rubbed her wrist, keeping her smile, but losing warmth. "It appears you are not ready," she said, voice edged. Vaelis's gaze stayed on her with cold clarity. "I don't need to be ready." Sereth held his stare for a moment too long, testing, challenging. Then she bowed again, sharper this time, and stepped back. The council murmured nervously. Maelor's eyes narrowed. Vaelis turned away as if nothing had happened. But inside him something had cracked open. His wolf was not calm. It raged, refusing the touch, rejecting the claim, thrashing against the walls of Vaelis's discipline like an animal sensing the wrong cage. That night, Vaelis did not sleep. He stood in the dark of his private chamber, staring at the city lights far below as if distance could make thoughts quieter. He closed his eyes. For a moment, there was nothing but the steady sound of his own breathing. Then the unease returned. Not pain, not exactly. More like a pressure in his chest, a persistent discomfort that refused to name itself. "Enough," Vaelis growled into the empty room. His wolf answered with a low rumble, dissatisfied. Ryden's knock came softly at the door, respectful but insistent. "Sire." Vaelis didn't turn. Go. Ryden entered anyway. Loyalty had a way of ignoring permission when it mattered. "You need rest," Ryden said. "I don't need anything," Vaelis replied. Ryden's gaze flicked toward Vaelis's clenched hands. "Since the day you marked her," he said carefully, "you have been different." Vaelis's head snapped slightly, the movement minimal but sharp. "She is a slave." Ryden didn't flinch. "Then why does your wolf act as if she is more?" Silence filled the room, thick as smoke. Vaelis's voice dropped, dangerous. "Watch your mouth." Ryden bowed his head slightly, conceding the line without stepping back from the truth. "I'm watching," he said. "That's the problem." Vaelis returned his gaze to the window, jaw tight. "Leave." Ryden hesitated, then obeyed. When the door closed, the room felt colder. Vaelis pressed his palm against his own chest, as if he could physically hold his wolf down. The unease remained. Down below in the damp lower levels, Elira was bleeding. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't heroic, just a small sharp cut inflicted by accident. A wounded soldier, half delirious, thrashing in fever, jerked violently as Elira tried to stitch his torn skin. The motion pulled the metal tool from her grip, and a jagged edge sliced across her palm. A line of red opened. Elira froze, not from pain, but from the sudden, strange sensation that followed. For a brief second, the mark on her throat cooled. Not much, just a flicker, as if something had noticed. She clenched her hand, pressing it against her skirt to stop the bleeding. Her breath caught and her eyes narrowed, confused by the odd shift inside her own chest. It felt like distance collapsing, like somewhere far above something had turned its head toward her. At that exact moment, Vaelis stopped mid-sentence in the council chamber upstairs. He had been listening to Mailer's endless strategies, his mind half engaged out of habit. Then pain sparked across his own hand, fast, sharp, gone in the blink of an eye. Vaelis's eyes narrowed, his fingers flexed as if testing for injury. There was none. Mailer paused, watching him. "Is there an issue?" My King Vaelis's gaze lifted slowly, distant. "No," he said. But he wasn't hearing Mailer anymore. His wolf stirred, restless, alert. Her. The thought wasn't his, not fully. Vaelis's jaw tightened. He pushed back from the council table. The chair scraped softly against the stone floor. Before anyone could question him, he was already walking. He didn't announce where he was going. He didn't explain. A king did not owe reasons. When Vaelis descended into the lower citadel, the air changed. Guards straightened instantly, backs rigid. Servants pressed themselves against walls, heads bowed. The whole level seemed to shrink under his presence. Elira was in the infirmary room, binding her palm with a strip of cloth. Her fingers moved efficiently, more annoyed than distressed. A guard snapped at her without thinking, then saw Vaelis behind him, and went pale. Sire Vaelis's gaze passed over the guard like he didn't exist. It landed on Elira's hand, on the smear of blood on her skin. His voice was low. "You're injured." Elira didn't rush to kneel. She didn't scramble to show fear. She simply lifted her eyes to his. "Not dead," she said. A ripple of shock ran through the room. A slave speaking that way to the king was madness. Vaelis stared at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he asked softly enough that it felt like a private test. "You're not afraid of me?" Elira's mouth curved in something that was not quite a smile. "I'm afraid of dying," she said. "You are just a different way to die." Raiden, who had followed silently, frowned. A guard bristled, ready to strike her for insolence. Vaelis lifted one finger. The guard froze. Vaelis's eyes never left Elira. "Bold," he said, voice flat. Elira shrugged slightly, wincing as the motion tugged her palm. "Honest." A pause. Vaelis's gaze dropped briefly to the slave mark on her throat, black against pale skin. Something in him tightened again, a flicker of that wrongness he had buried the first day. He looked back up. "Why do you heal them?" he asked. Elira's eyes hardened. "Because I can," she said, "and because I'm not like you." The words hung in the air like a blade thrown without warning. Raiden inhaled sharply, ready to intervene. Vaelis didn't move. He just watched her as if she had become a problem he couldn't solve with force. That was the beginning of it. Not the bond, not the obsession, not yet. The beginning of the king realizing that ownership did not equal understanding. In the days that followed, Vaelis noticed things he hadn't meant to. When Elira was near, when she was brought up from the lower levels to report on the condition of soldiers, or when he passed through corridors and caught the faint scent of herbs and iron on her skin, his mind felt clearer. His wolf calmed. The restless pressure in his chest eased, not disappearing, but settling like a storm choosing to wait. When she was absent, the unease returned sharper than before. The quiet became loud. The nights stretched thin. Once Vaelis found himself asking Raiden the question before he even realized he needed the answer. "Where is she?" Raiden looked at him carefully. "In the slave quarters," he said, "where she always is." Vaelis's jaw tightened as if that fact offended him. "Bring her up," he said. When Elira arrived, escorted but not restrained, she stopped several paces away. The guards hovered tense. Vaelis looked at her and said nothing. He simply stood there watching her like a wolf staring at a closed door it doesn't remember locking. Elira's brows drew together. "Did you call me just to look at me?" she asked. Vaelis's mouth tightened. "You speak more than necessary." Elira's gaze flicked to his hands. "You asked for me. I asked to see what I own." He said the lie automatic. Elira's eyes sharpened. "Then you should learn the difference between owning a body and breaking a person." The guard nearest her flinched, waiting for punishment. Vaelis didn't punish her. He didn't dismiss her. He simply let her stand there. Raiden watched it all with a kind of grim understanding. Later, when they were alone, Raiden spoke the thought that had been circling for days. "You're giving too much attention to a slave." Vaelis's answer came instantly practiced. "I'm inspecting my property." Raiden held his gaze. "And does that explanation satisfy you, sire?" Vaelis's eyes narrowed. "It doesn't need to." But even as he said it, the words felt thin, because the truth was something he wasn't ready to name. When Elira looked at him, she didn't see a king. She saw a man who had branded her, and she refused to let that brand decide what she became. That refusal, quiet, relentless, was the first thing in years that Vaelis could not command into submission. And wolves do not forget the scent of something they cannot control. One night, Vaelis stood alone again in his chamber, the city spread beneath him like scattered embers. He wasn't angry this time. He wasn't planning. He was simply unsure. His wolf moved in the dark inside him, a shape of hunger and instinct pressing against the boundaries of Vaelis's discipline. A thought rose quiet and stubborn as a heartbeat. Not a slave. Vaelis's hand clenched on the stone windowsill. "Shut up," he whispered. But the command didn't land the way it used to, because for the first time, Vaelis Draven Alpha King, ruler of the Citadel, the man who could silence an entire hall with a single step, was beginning to doubt his own certainty. And if a king doubts, the world begins to shift. If a wolf doubts, it begins to hunt. The first thing Maelor did after the arena doors closed behind Elira was smile. Not the kind of smile that showed pleasure. Maelor didn't waste emotion on anything as small as satisfaction. It was the smile of a man watching a lever drop into place, a mechanism finally clicking as designed. The council chamber was smaller than the Blackstone Hall, built for strategy rather than spectacle. Its windows were narrow and high, letting in a gray cold light that made every face look a shade paler than it should have. The torches burned low, as if even flame knew to keep quiet here. Maelor stood at the head of the table, fingers resting lightly on the carved wood. He didn't lean, didn't pace. He didn't need to. He had learned long ago that stillness unsettled people more than movement. "The slave is becoming a variable," he said, voice soft and sharp at the same time. "And variables threaten stability." A nobleman to his right scoffed. She's a weak healer. Mailer didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Then why, he asked, has the Alpha King stepped into the slave quarters himself? The room cooled by several degrees. The question was simple, but it forced everyone to swallow the same uncomfortable truth. They had all seen it. Vaelis Draven descending into the lower levels, the place kings were not meant to acknowledge. The guards bowing deeper than usual. The servants pressing into the walls like shadows. The rumor that his golden eyes had lingered on the marked girl's throat a fraction too long. Mailer continued watching their expressions the way a physician watches a fever. We cannot strike her openly, he said. We cannot execute her. Not now, not after he branded her in the hall, not after she has become visible. Another councilman cleared his throat. Then what do you suggest? A pause, then a voice from the far end of the table, thin, clever, eager to please. A test, the man said, a trial, something that looks like discipline. Mailer tilted his head. Go on. The man swallowed. The arena, he said, a survival trial. The word arena hung in the air like a promise. Mailer's smile returned faint and satisfied. The arena, he repeated. Yes. A noble woman frowned. If she dies, the king may. If she dies. Mailer interrupted gently. The problem resolves itself. If she lives, then we will learn what she is. He tapped the table, once a quiet sound that somehow felt like a gavel. Either way, Mailer said we win. No one argued. Not because they all agreed, but because Mailer's plans had teeth, and they had long since learned not to place their hands too close. Elira smelled the arena before she saw it. Snow, iron, old sweat ground into stone. A faint trace of animal musk lingering in the wind, fear mixed with thrill. The citadel's outer ring was a place most nobles never visited. The path down to the arena cut through narrow corridors and open stairways carved into the mountainside, and each step felt like descending into a mouth. Elira's wrists were unchained, now her skin still marked by silver bruises from the day she was dragged into the hall. But the weight on her throat remained. The slave mark sat against her skin like a living collar pulsing occasionally, as if reminding her of its presence. 2 guards escorted her out into the open where the wind hit hard enough to steal breath. The arena spread out below an oval bowl of stone and packed snow surrounded by dark walls and higher terraces, where spectators could sit and pretend this was honor instead of cruelty. The sky was a pale sheet of winter light. It made the snow blinding. A guard shoved her forward with a gloved hand between her shoulder blades. Survival trial, he announced louder than necessary. Live through it and you keep breathing in this citadel. Elira looked around slowly. No weapon, no armor, no allies. Just her thin dress, her bare hands, and a mark designed to punish her for trying too hard. She turned her head toward the guard, voice rough but steady. And if I don't live, the guard shrugged like he was bored. Then you prove everyone right. Elira's mouth tightened. That phrase, prove everyone right, was another chain. A softer one, but just as heavy. The world loved turning suffering into evidence. The iron gate behind her groaned as it closed. The sound echoed metallic and final. Above the terraces held observers. Not a full crowd, not the kind of spectacle the Blackstone Hall demanded, but enough to satisfy the council's hunger for control. Elira didn't need to look up to know Mailer was there. She could feel his attention like cold fingertips on the back of her neck. She stepped onto the packed snow and forced her breathing to slow. Fear would drain her faster than blood. Her old instinct heel support serve rose and then faltered when it met the slave mark. It was like reaching for a door that had been sealed shut. Elira flexed her fingers once. Twice, the mark warmed faintly, warning her not to test it too hard. Fine, she thought. If I can't heal, I'll survive. A horn sounded short, harsh. From a side gate, the first creature burst out. It wasn't a wolf. Not fully. It was something stitched together by cruelty and training, long-limbed, hunched, moving with a speed that made the snow spray. Its eyes were too bright. Its breath steamed in ragged bursts. The way it ran was wrong, like a predator that didn't know when to stop. 2 more followed. 3. Exactly the number needed to make the trial look possible while ensuring it wasn't. Elira backed up measuring distance, searching for something in the arena that could become a tool, a broken spear, a loose stone, anything, nothing. The first beast lunged. Elira moved but half a heartbeat too slow. Pain flashed across her shoulder as claws sliced through fabric and skin. The heat of the cut came first, then the cold as the wind rushed into it. Her body jolted. Her breath stuttered. Red bloomed against white. The terraces above reacted the way people always did when they were safely distant from pain. A man's voice drifted down amused, as expected. Elira's teeth clenched. She stepped sideways, forcing her feet into a wider stance so she wouldn't slip. Her shoulder throbbed, blood seeping down her arm. She reached instinctively for her healing magic. The slave mark flared. Pain snapped down her spine, tight and precise. It wasn't random suffering, it was correction punishment engineered into her nerves. Her vision narrowed for a second. Her stomach clenched hard. She hissed through her teeth and withdrew her reach for magic like pulling a hand away from fire. The second beast circled, eyes fixed on her weakness. It lunged low, aiming to take her legs out. Elira jumped back, but the third creature was already there, closing off her retreat. It moved in a practiced rhythm, trained to herd prey into disadvantage. She was being managed, controlled like property. A burst of bitter anger rose in her chest, not loud, not dramatic, just a hard, sharp refusal, not again. She waited until the second beast committed, then pivoted fast, using its momentum against it. Her elbow slammed into its jaw with a wet impact. The creature yelped and stumbled, but not enough to fall. The first beast surged again, and Elira couldn't evade completely this time. She was hit hard, knocked backward into the snow. Cold slammed into her back. The air punched out of her lungs. For a second, the world was only white sky and pain. Then, the ground shook as claws landed near her head. Elira rolled barely in time. Snow sprayed. A mouth snapped shut where her throat had been. Her heart hammered. She got to her knees, then her feet. Her shoulder burned. Her ribs ached from the fall. Her hands shook not from fear, but from exhaustion creeping in. She was not built for this, and they knew it. Above, someone laughed again, a short, satisfied sound. Elira lifted her hand and saw blood streaking her fingers bright against her skin. The sight did something to her mind. Not panic, not helplessness, something else. Time slowed just a fraction, not like magic bending reality, but like the human brain narrowing focus when it decides survival matters more than anything else. The beast's snarls faded to a distant rumble. The terrace voices blurred into an indistinct murmur. Elira stared at the blood on her hand. So red, so obvious. A thought slipped through her mind, calm and terrible. I'm going to die here, not because she had given up, because the math was simple, because she knew what her body could do, and she knew what they had taken from her. The cold wind cut across her face, her hair whipped loose, her breath turned to mist, and still she did not beg. She did not scream for help. She rose, shoulders squared, and faced the beasts again. If I die, she thought, I will not die kneeling. High above the arena in the council chamber, Vaelis Draven sat through another meeting he didn't need. Mailer's voice droned on about stability alliances and obligations. Sereth Vale stood nearby, poised like a promise the council wanted Vaelis to swallow. Valis listened with half his mind out of habit. The other half was elsewhere, down in the lower levels where the air smelled like damp stone and pain. He didn't know why. He told himself it was nothing, a curiosity, an irritation, a ripple from a mistake already made. He told himself she was property. His wolf did not agree. It had been restless since the day of the branding. Not wild, not yet, but unsettled like a blade pulled slightly from its sheath. Every time Vaelis tried to distract it with politics, with duty, with cold discipline, it returned to the same point. When she was near, the wolf quieted, watchful but calm. When she was far, it paced, growling low under Vaelis's ribs. It made no sense. Vaelis had built a life around sense. Maelor was speaking again. My king, he was saying, the eastern pax, Vaelis's hands, were folded on the table. Then, without warning, pain cut across Vaelis's palm like a knife. Sharp, sudden, gone. Vaelis's head lifted. His fingers flexed, testing for injury. There was nothing, but the sensation lingered behind his bones like an echo. His wolf surged to the surface with a roar that wasn't sound but certainty. Blood. Her blood. Vaelis's breath hitched. No. He whispered the word, barely audible. Ryden, seated behind him, stiffened. Sire Vaelis's eyes turned toward him. Gold gone darker. Where is she? Ryden's brows drew together. She was taken for a trial. Vaelis was already standing. The council chamber reacted with shock. Maelor rose halfway, voice sharp. My king, this meeting. Vaelis didn't even glance at him. He moved like a storm unleashed, crossing the room with a speed that made nobles stumble back. His dominance flooded the chamber heavy enough that a few weaker alphas instinctively lowered their heads. Sereth stepped into his path, trying to reclaim control with pride. If you leave now, she said, voice hard, you choose a slave over your throne. Vaelis stopped so abruptly that Sereth flinched. He looked at her, then really looked, and his gaze was not cruel. It was empty, like she wasn't even an obstacle worth remembering. No, he said softly. Then his voice sharpened, the edge of the wolf bleeding through. I choose truth over a throne built on lies. Sereth's lips parted, shocked. Vaelis turned away. He didn't call guards. He didn't gather an escort. In that moment, the Alpha King was no longer a ruler managing optics. He was a predator hunting. The arena gate exploded inward. Not literally into pieces, Vaelis did not need theatrics, but the heavy iron door was forced open with such violent speed that it slammed into the wall with a ringing crash. Every head turned. The beasts froze, mid-circle ears twitching. Elira, breath ragged, looked up from the snow. Vaelis stepped through the gate like he had been carved out of darkness and dropped into white. His cloak, black heavy, snapped in the wind behind him. His eyes burned. His posture was not human now. It was a wolf's stance translated into a man's body. A noble on the terrace sprang to his feet. You can't, this is a sanctioned trial. Vaelis didn't hear him, or he chose not to. The first beast lunged toward Vaelis with a desperate, instinctive attempt to remove the bigger threat. Vaelis didn't dodge. He lifted one hand and caught the creature by the throat mid-leap. The impact should have driven him back. It didn't. His fingers tightened. A sharp, dry crack echoed over the snow. The beast's body went limp. Vaelis threw it aside like it weighed nothing. The second beast hesitated only a heartbeat. Vaelis crossed the distance in a blur, grabbed its shoulder, and drove it into the stone wall with a force that made snow slide down the arena sides. The creature yelped, collapsing. The third beast snarled, backing away, its eyes flicking between Vaelis and Elira, as if realizing too late what it had been used for. Vaelis advanced one step. Dominance rolled off him like a physical wave. The beast's legs buckled. It lowered its head instinctively, forced into submission by a presence older than fear. It dropped to the snow, trembling. The terrace above had gone silent. No cheering, no laughter, only the awareness of what they had unleashed. Vaelis turned away from the defeated creature as if it didn't matter. His gaze snapped to Elira. She was on one knee, blood streaking her shoulder, her hand pressed against her side where she had been struck during the fall. Snow clung to her hair and lashes. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes were still open, still intact. Vaelis crossed to her and dropped to one knee beside her. His hands hovered for a second, as if he were suddenly uncertain what touch meant. Then he lifted her carefully, drawing her against his chest. She was light, too light. Her blood stained his glove, warm against the cold. The moment the red touched his skin, something inside Vaelis broke open. His wolf surged, no longer restrained. Not a thought, not a suggestion, an order from something older than logic. Hold her, protect her, kill everything that made her bleed. Vaelis's arms tightened around her like a shield. His voice came out as a low, rough sound. Who did this? No one answered. Maelor did not stand up to speak. Sereth did not call it politics. The nobles did not dare. Elira's head lolled slightly against Vaelis's shoulder. Her eyelids fluttered, fighting. Vaelis's hand rose to her throat, to the slave mark he had placed there. His thumb brushed near the black symbol. The mark reacted. It vibrated under his touch, subtle at first, then stronger. A tiny fracture appeared like a hairline crack in glass. Vaelis froze. The crack widened. From within the black, a golden light seeped through. Not bright enough to light the arena, not dramatic enough for the terrace to gasp, but unmistakable. Gold against black, life against control. Raiden, who had reached the arena. Edge breath hard, whispered almost involuntarily, "That's not possible." Vaelis stared at the mark, his mind racing. His wolf did not race, it recognized. It howled silent but earth-shaking, filling Vaelis's skull with a single undeniable truth. Mine, not property, not slave, mate. Elira's body went suddenly heavier in his arms. Her breath shuddered. Her eyes rolled back slightly. She was fading. Vaelis's chest tightened, and the feeling was so sharp it shocked him. Fear, not fear for his throne, not fear for politics, fear of losing her. "Don't," Vaelis said, voice low, almost pleading. "Don't die." It wasn't a command. It was a request. Elira's lips parted, but no sound came. Her head slipped against his shoulder. Vaelis pulled her closer as if he could keep her soul tethered with force alone. Then he stood, turning toward the gate. "Open the path," he growled, voice layered with the wolf. Guards scrambled. Nobles backed away. No one dared question. Vaelis carried Elira out of the arena as if the entire kingdom had become irrelevant compared to the fragile weight in his arms. He brought her to his private wing, not to the healer's quarters, not to the slave infirmary, his own rooms where only Raiden and a handful of trusted guards were allowed without permission. The walls were darker here, polished wood and black stone carved with old symbols. Firelight warmed the air, but not enough to remove the chill that clung to Elira's skin. Vaelis laid her carefully on his bed. The sight was wrong, her pale face against his sheets, her battered shoulder on his pillow. It looked like a violation of space, or a correction. Raiden moved quickly, blocking the doorway when a royal healer tried to step in. "I can help," the healer insisted, eyes wide. Raiden's voice was firm, "Not without the king's order." The healer swallowed and stepped back. Vaelis stood beside the bed, watching Elira's chest rise and fall shallowly. Lyra Morn arrived in minutes, hair-pinned back hands already clean and ready. Unlike other healers, she didn't flinch at Vaelis's aura. She had served too long to fear power. She respected it, understood it, but did not tremble. She examined Elira's injuries with quick precision, murmuring to herself. She cleaned the wound, sealed what she could with basic salves. "She'll live," Lyra said at last. Vaelis' shoulders loosened by a fraction. "Barely," he said. Lyra's eyes moved to the slave mark, the faint crack now visible beneath the skin like a thread of gold. Her brow furrowed. "This is wrong," she murmured. Raiden stepped closer. Wrong how Lyra's fingers hovered near the mark without touching. "This isn't a typical slave brand," she said slowly, "not the ones used for control in lesser packs." Vaelis' gaze sharpened. "Explain." Lyra took a breath as if choosing words carefully was the difference between life and death. "This," she said, "is an ancient seal." Raiden stared. "A seal," Lyra nodded. "It doesn't only punish disobedience," she said. "It restricts her magic. It locks something inside her." Vaelis' jaw clenched. What Lyra looked up at him, eyes steady. "A bond," she said softly. "A mate bond." The room seemed to stop. Raiden's breath caught. Vaelis did not move. Inside him, his wolf surged again, triumphant and furious at the same time. "Yes, her." Lyra continued, voice quiet but clear. "Sire," she said, "you didn't mark a slave." Vaelis' eyes darkened. "You sealed your mate." Silence fell like snow. Vaelis took one slow step back, as if the truth had weight. "No," he said, voice flat. "Impossible." Lyra didn't flinch. "The seal cracked when you touched her after she bled," she said. "That doesn't happen without a true link trying to surface." Vaelis' hand curled into a fist at his side. He could command armies. He could silence the Blackstone Hall. He could break treaties with a word, but he could not command this. He looked down at Elira's face. Her lashes rested against her cheeks, dark against pale skin. Her mouth was slightly parted as she breathed. The mark on her throat pulsed faintly, as if struggling. Mate. The word should have been a triumph. It felt like a curse. Because if it was true, then he had branded her in front of everyone. He had called her property. He had forced her to kneel. And his wolf had known before he did? Raiden spoke carefully, as if stepping through a field of glass. "Sire," he said, "what do you want done?" Vaelis' voice came low, rough. "Keep her alive," he said. "No one touches her unless I allow it." Lyra nodded once, but her eyes held warning. "She will wake," she said, "and she will not thank you." Vaelis didn't answer. He already knew. Elira woke as if dragged upward through cold water. Her eyes snapped open. Breath-sharp body trying to sit before pain reminded her she was still flesh. She pushed herself up, then hissed, clutching her shoulder where the wound had been dressed. The room around her was warm, dim smelling of cedar and smoke, not the slave infirmary. Her gaze flicked across the space, dark wood, expensive fabric, a fire burning low. Everything here whispered power. Then she saw him. Vaelis stood near the fireplace. Arms crossed his profile, cut sharp by firelight. He wasn't wearing ceremonial armor now, but his presence was no less heavy. His eyes turned toward her slowly. Elira's stomach tightened. So this is his room, she thought. His cage. Her voice came out raw. "What are you planning to control me with now?" Vaelis didn't answer immediately. Elira's fingers curled into the sheets. "I don't owe you anything," she said, harsher. "Don't confuse my survival with gratitude." Vaelis' jaw flexed. He spoke at last, slow and deliberate. "You nearly died." Elira let out a short, bitter laugh. "You put me in that arena." The air sharpened. Vaelis took one step forward, then stopped, as if remembering the last time he had moved too close to her without permission. "You were sent there," he said. "Not by me." Elira's eyes narrowed. "You're the king." Vaelis held her gaze. Yes, then don't pretend, Elira said, voice shaking with controlled anger, that anything happens in your citadel without your shadow somewhere near it. Vaelis's expression didn't soften, but something in his eyes shifted. A tension, a fracture. Elira swung her legs off the bed, intending to stand. Pain flared. Her knees threatened to buckle. She forced herself upright anyway. Vaelis moved not fast, not predatory, just one controlled step hand lifting slightly. Elira recoiled instantly. Don't touch me. The words were small, but they landed like a wall. Vaelis stopped. For the first time, he didn't push, he didn't command, he didn't insist. Elira's breath trembled, surprise mixed with suspicion. She stared at him, voice low. "You're not the one who saved me," she said. "You're just the one who arrived too late." Vaelis flinched as if struck. He deserved it, and she knew it. Elira turned away, bracing a hand on the bedpost. "Let me go," she said. "I'd rather bleed in the snow than live under your mark." Vaelis's voice dropped. "You can't leave." Elira laughed again, bitter. "Because I'm your property." The word tasted like poison. Vaelis's eyes darkened. "Because someone is trying to kill you," he said, "and because he stopped. Because my wolf will tear the world apart if you vanish," he thought, but he didn't say it. Elira's gaze hardened. "Don't say it," she warned, as if sensing the shape of whatever excuse he was about to offer. "Don't say you care. You don't get to pretend you care." She limped toward the door. Guards outside shifted, uncertain. Vaelis didn't stop her, not physically, but his voice followed her, quiet and dangerous. "You are safer here." Elira paused, fingers on the doorframe shoulders, tense. "Safe," she repeated, like the arena was safe. Then she stepped out, and Vaelis watched her go, something in his chest tightening around a truth he couldn't yet hold without breaking. Lyra found Elira later in a smaller sitting room off the corridor, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. Elira looked up when Lyra entered, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. Lyra set a tray down, gently, water broth, herbs. "Drink," she said. Elira didn't move. "Tell me the truth," she demanded. "What is on my throat?" Lyra studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "It's an ancient seal," she said. "They call it a slave mark now, because people love giving ugly things softer names." "But it wasn't made for slaves?" Elira's throat tightened. Then what was it made for? Lyra's eyes softened slightly, as if she hated the answer. "To suppress a bond," she said. "To lock it away." Elira stared. "A mate bond," Lyra nodded. Elira's hands clenched in the blanket. "So I was born with a curse," she whispered. Lyra shook her head. "No," she said. "You were born with power?" Elira's laugh was small, broken. "Power is what they call it when it benefits them," she said. "When it doesn't, they call it danger or defect." Lyra stepped closer, voice low. "Your bloodline is old," she said. "So old the packs once hunted it. Healers who could not only mend flesh, but reinforce bonds, strengthen wolves, amplify life itself." Elira's eyes widened slightly, disbelief and horror mixing. Lyra continued, "If your pack sold you," she said, "it wasn't because you were useless." Elira's lips parted and the words came out like a wound. "Then why? Because they feared you would be recognized," Lyra said simply. Elira's face went blank. For a long moment she didn't breathe. Then she whispered hollow, "So my whole life." Lyra didn't interrupt. Elira swallowed, voice shaking. "My whole life I was turned into a thing," she said, "because I was born wrong in a way they couldn't control." Lyra's gaze held hers. "You were born rare," she said, "and rare things attract greed." Elira looked down at her hands, the skin still scarred from healing others under punishment. So I wasn't weak, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a bitter realization. I was just surrounded by people who needed me to believe I was. Lyra nodded once. Exactly. Elira's eyes lifted again, suddenly sharp. And Vaelis, she asked, what does this make him? Lyra hesitated. Complicated, she said. Elira's laugh returned cold. No, she said. It makes him a man who marked me anyway. Lyra didn't argue because the truth did not protect Vaelis from consequences. Vaelis listened from the corridor. He hadn't meant to. He hadn't planned to stand outside a room like a thief catching fragments of a conversation he didn't deserve. But he had walked the hall restless, and when he heard Elira's voice raw, cracked open, his feet had stopped. He heard Lyra explain the bloodline. He heard Elira's quiet devastation. He heard the words, my whole life I was turned into a thing. Vaelis's hand had tightened on the stone archway until his knuckles whitened. Ryden approached silently and stopped beside him. He didn't speak at first. Then softly, you can't fix this with commands. Vaelis's voice came out low, hoarse. I know. He didn't go inside, not because he didn't want to, because he suddenly realized power was useless here. He could order guards. He could punish Maelor. He could dismantle the council if he chose, but he could not undo the image burned into Elira's mind, his hand on her throat in the Blackstone Hall, his voice calling her property. The first time in years Vaelis Draven faced a problem he could not solve by being the strongest creature in the room, and that terrified him more than any assassin ever had. Maelor moved quickly once he learned the seal had cracked. The next council meeting was not a meeting at all. It was a verdict. If the mate bond completes, Maelor said, voice calm, our king becomes untouchable. A councilman frowned. That sounds like a good thing. Maelor smiled. A king who cannot be influenced is never good for a council, he said, especially not a council that has built its power on steering him. A noblewoman's eyes widened. You think he would choose her over politics? Maelor didn't answer immediately. Then he said softly, he already has. The room went silent. Maelor leaned forward slightly. A king with a true mate is stronger, he said, but a king who loves his mate is dangerous. He becomes unpredictable. A man swallowed hard. Killing her inside the citadel would be treason. Maelor's gaze sharpened. Letting her live, he said coldly, is treason against the kingdom we've preserved. He laid out the plan like a map, an internal team, a staged accident, and a final pressure point forced Vaelis to commit to Sereth Vale publicly to anchor him before the bond could reshape him. The council agreed because fear makes cowards polite. The Grand Council Hall was filled that night. Torches burned bright. The floor gleamed. Packs from distant territories stood in formal rows, their alphas rigid with expectation. Vaelis sat on the throne. Expression blank, Sereth Vale stood below the dais, poised her crimson dress like a statement. Maelor stepped forward, voice loud enough for the whole hall. The kingdom requires a legitimate queen, he declared, not a marked slave with a broken seal. Sereth lifted her chin. I offer you stability, she said, eyes locked on Vaelis. An army, an alliance, a future. Her gaze flicked almost dismissively toward the side corridor where Elira would have been if she were allowed here. That girl offers only chaos, Sereth said, and weakness. Vaelis's hands tightened on the throne arms. Maelor pressed. Choose, he said smoothly. The kingdom, or the girl who makes you lose control. Vaelis didn't answer, because in that moment, Ryden burst through the side doors, face pale. Sire Ryden said voice tight, Elira is gone. The hall inhaled in collective shock. Vaelis stood. The sound of the throne chair scraping back was like thunder. Dominance rolled off him so hard, several guards at the edges dropped to one knee. Sereth's voice cut through sharp with anger. If you walk away now, you choose her over the crown. Vaelis turned his head toward her slowly. His eyes were terrifyingly calm. No, he said. Then he spoke the words that made the entire room freeze. I choose truth over a crown built on lies. And he left. Elira realized she'd been tricked the moment she stepped into the northern corridor. The lanterns were dimmer here, half the sconces unlit, the air colder, too empty. She slowed, hand-moving unconsciously to her throat. The slave mark pulsed as if sensing danger. Then 3 figures stepped out from the shadows. Not guards in uniform, not soldiers, assassins dressed in dark cloth faces, partially covered movements too quiet. One of them spoke, voice almost gentle. Don't struggle, he said. A quiet death hurts less. Elira backed up, eyes flicking to the nearest doorway. Too far. She touched the mark again, forcing herself to reach for magic. Pain snapped down her spine. The seal flared hot, restraining her like a fist. Elira's teeth clenched. So you're afraid, she said, voice shaking with anger rather than fear. Afraid of a slave. The assassin's eyes narrowed. Not afraid of what you are, he said. Afraid of what you'll become. They lunged. Elira threw up her hands, forcing whatever magic she could past the seal. A thin golden shield flickered into existence, weak, trembling, but real. A blade struck it. The shield cracked. A second strike. It cracked against spider webbing with fractures. Elira's breathing turned ragged. Her shoulders screamed. Her ribs burned. She couldn't hold it much longer. A blade slipped through the crack and sliced across her forearm. Not deep, but enough. Blood hit the stone floor in red droplets. The assassin smiled behind his mask. Good, he murmured. That will make it faster. Elira's vision narrowed, and somewhere far away, an answering roar split the air. Not a sound in the hall, a sound in the bones. Vaelis. The golden shield shattered at the exact moment Vaelis arrived. He didn't run like a man. He moved like a creature that had decided the world's rules no longer mattered. He hit the first assassin with enough force to slam him into the wall. The second barely had time to raise his blade before Vaelis caught his wrist and twisted. The man screamed. The third assassin stumbled back, shaking. Sire, he stammered, we were only following council orders. Vaelis's eyes turned black at the center the wolf staring through. The council, he said, voice layered, does not command inside my house. The assassin tried to dart around him toward Elira. Vaelis stepped in front of her without thinking. A blade cut into Vaelis's shoulder. Blood welled. Elira froze, shocked. Vaelis didn't even flinch. He grabbed the assassin by the throat and slammed him down. Hard. The corridor fell silent except for Elira's harsh breathing. The slave mark on Elira's throat vibrated violently now. The tiny cracks glowed gold. Elira's hand lifted toward Vaelis, instinctively healing impulse, then stopped when the seal burned her again. Vaelis turned to face her. He didn't reach for her. He didn't command. He stopped several paces away as if he were giving her the only thing he could offer now, space. His voice came out low. I was wrong. Elira's eyes narrowed, suspicion sharp. You say that because of the bond. Vaelis shook his head once. No, he said, because even before I knew what it was, I couldn't stand the idea of you bleeding for them. Elira swallowed throat tight. Vaelis continued, voice rough with truth that scraped. I called you property to prove I could control everything he said. But from the start, the one truly chained wasn't only you. Elira's jaw tightened. I don't want another alpha deciding my life, she whispered. Vaelis's gaze held hers steady. Then, this time, he said you decide. And then right there in the stone corridor before Ryden and Lyra and the guards who had arrived panting, Vaelis Draven lowered himself to one knee. Not theatrically, not to be seen, but because he remembered the sound of Elira's knees hitting stone in the Blackstone Hall, and he understood finally what he had stolen. He lifted his eyes to her. "I forced you to kneel in front of the kingdom," he said quietly. "Now I kneel in front of you." Elira's breath hitched. Vaelis's voice stayed steady. "If you want to leave," he said, "I will open the gates. No pursuit, no chains, no guards." Elira stared, stunned. Vaelis continued, "If you want to stay, I will break the seal, but I will not replace it with another chain." Elira's hands trembled. Her instincts screamed at her not to trust any alpha. Her pain whispered that this was a trick, but the sight of the Alpha King kneeling, offering not taking, hit something deep in her chest. She stepped forward one slow step. Her voice shook, but it was clear. "If you break it," she said, "I will not trade one collar for another." Vaelis answered immediately. "No bond," he said, "has the right to replace your will." Elira closed her eyes. Then she nodded. Vaelis raised his hand toward her throat. This time he moved slowly, deliberately, as if every inch mattered. His fingers touched the slave mark. Dark magic surged up like a trapped animal biting back. Heat scorched his skin. Blood welled. Elira's eyes flew open. "Stop," she gasped. "It's hurting you." Vaelis's teeth clenched. "It hurt you," he said through the pain. "In front of me." His voice dropped fierce. "This time it takes something from me." He pressed harder, pulling at the seal with pure alpha force. The mark resisted thrashing. The golden cracks widened. Elira's breath hitched as the pain on her throat surged, then suddenly released. With a sound like a snap inside the air, the black seal fractured completely. Golden light burst out, washing over Vaelis's hand and Elira's throat like dawn, breaking through ash. Elira staggered, clutching her chest, the void she'd carried years of being told she was nothing. Years of being handled like a thing didn't vanish, but something new unfolded beneath it. A warmth, a tether. Not a rope pulling her down, a thread offering steadiness. Vaelis's breathing was heavy, his hand hovering near her throat, but not gripping. He asked very softly, as if afraid the answer could shatter something. "What do you feel?" Elira swallowed, eyes wide. "Freedom," she whispered. Vaelis closed his eyes. For a heartbeat, he looked less like a king, and more like a man who had finally found the thing he didn't know he'd been starving for. They returned to the council hall together, not with Vaelis dragging her behind him, not with guards shoving her forward. They walked side by side. Elira's arm was bandaged. Her posture was straight. Her throat was bare, no black mark, no collar of magic. The hall erupted into noise the moment they stepped through the doors. Mailer's face changed, first shock, then fury, then calculation. "You broke the ancient law," Mailer snapped. Elira met his gaze without flinching. "No," she said clearly. "He broke the chains you used to hide behind law." Lyra stepped forward, voice steady. "Elira Voss carries an ancient bloodline," she declared. "The so-called slave mark was used unlawfully as a seal to suppress her mate bond and restrict her power." Ryden placed evidence on the council table, documents, order signatures. "False summons," he said. "Arena authorization." He glanced at Mailer, eyes cold, and the names of internal assassins. The hall spiraled into chaos. Packs murmured, nobles shouted, guards tightened formation. Mailer tried to regain control. "A slave cannot be queen," he barked. "The kingdom will not accept it." Vaelis stepped down from the throne. He didn't look at Mailer, he looked at Elira. His voice carried across the hall, calm and absolute. "She is not a slave," Vaelis said. "She is not property." A hush fell. Vaelis continued, each word deliberate. She is the person I wronged, he said, the person I chose to protect. His gaze stayed on Elira. And the only person who has the right to decide whether she stands beside me. Mailer's face tightened. You would throw away alliances for her. Vaelis turned his head slightly, then eyes cold as winter stone. If this kingdom requires a queen chosen by lies, he said, then I don't need this kingdom. The statement landed like a blade. Elira stepped forward one step, her choice, her movement. I will not be queen as payment, she said, voice clear. I will not be queen because fate demands it. Her gaze swept the hall, taking in the nobles who had laughed at her, the alphas who had watched her kneel, the councilmen who had turned cruelty into policy. I will stand here, Elira said, because I know what it feels like to be crushed by wrong laws. Her voice hardened slightly. And I will make sure no one else is crushed the way I was. Vaelis watched her with something that looked like reverence, not possession. Mailer's power collapsed in that moment, because the story he'd built that Elira was nothing had been publicly shattered. Guards moved in, orders were shouted, the council chamber became a storm of consequences. Sereth Vale stood, rigid eyes bright with anger and humiliation. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply turned and walked out, red dress, cutting through the crowd like a final refusal. When the hall finally quieted again, Vaelis and Elira stood near the dais, equal in posture, equal in space. Vaelis did not place a mate mark on her. Not then, not without her explicit choice. Instead, he asked quietly, when will you be ready? Elira's gaze held his. When I'm certain it's a promise, she said, not another chain. Vaelis lowered his head slightly, the motion filled with respect. Then I'll wait, he said. Morning light filtered through the high windows, pale and clean. It touched Elira's bare throat, turning it into something sacred, simply by being untouched by darkness. She stood beside the Alpha King, not behind him, not beneath him, and for the first time the kingdom had no choice but to see her as what she had always been, a person, not property. Power is loud. It can force knees to stone and silence a hall with a single word. But real change doesn't come from power. It comes from choice. Elira survives not because someone saves her, but because she refuses to let cruelty define her worth. And Vaelis learns the hardest truth a ruler can learn: control is not the same as strength. If you can't respect someone's will, you don't deserve their loyalty or their love. The strongest bond isn't the one that chains you. It's the one that lets you stay free and still choose to stand beside someone anyway. What began as a mark of ownership became the moment everything changed for both of them. Thank you for staying with this story of power pain and the courage to choose something better. If it moved you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories like this. There are many more hidden truths and unforgettable journeys waiting for you.